I joined the Navy in 1962 and was a direct commission into the Navy Nurse Corps. I was already an RN when I joined. Over the years, we've seen lots of changes in the Navy Nurse Corps as far as different responsibilities that we could have. And probably one of the most lasting ones now is the fact that eventually we were allowed to not only be in charge of nurses, but we could be in charge of medical facilities. And so now there are Navy nurses who are commanding officers. And I was commanding officer at the Sandpoint Clinic. I was here in Sandpoint as a patient when I was going to the University of Washington. I graduated from a 3-year nursing school, and so I didn't have a degree. And the Navy really did want their nurses to have degrees. So they sent me back to the University of Washington to get my degree. So I was a patient at the Sandpoint Naval Clinic at that time. And it was a military clinic like all other military clinics. And it wasn't, I can't think of anything particularly outstanding about it. I know at that time they did have pediatrics and they had a nursery, because I loved the nursery. I used to go visit. Whenever I came, I went and looked at the babies. I also got to fly out of the Naval Air Station. They still had flights out of here. I went with a reserve unit back down to California. My family lived in California at the time. And so a couple of us, on our Christmas vacation from school, we took a reserve flight out of Sandpoint. So we flew out of here, and it was fun. It was one of the few times that I actually took a hop, as it's called. It was sort of a fun trip on this cargo plane. There were 2 cargo planes apparently that left at the same time. I mean, as I said, they were reserves that were going to pick up. They were going to Camp Pendleton. No, it wasn't Camp Pendleton. It was to Irvine. It was the base in El Toro, the Marine Corps Air Station in El Toro. They were going there, and it was a special group of planes that were taking Vietnam soldiers and sailors, etc., and transferring them home, trying to make it easy for them to get home for Christmas. And this reserve group was going to be doing that, and so we also got to get to go home too with the group. So that was really a lot of fun to do. So that was my first experience with the clinic at Sandpoint, and then I came in 1991 in December, and took over the clinic. It was, by that time, it was primarily for active duty. There were some retired dependents, but we no longer had, of course, nursery and all of those types of things. Most of the patients were, as I said, we had active duty, mostly active duty, those people who were stationed here on the base, as well as within the Seattle area, like from the reservists. We also had people from the recruiting commands and some of the other commands. We also took care of some of the public health folks, the uniform service, public health. I met one of the nurses from the public health service, and we became very good friends, and we still are good friends after all of these years. As a commanding officer, you really sort of don't get to see a lot of patients, and which is I missed, and so I frequently went out roaming around and talking to folks that were visiting the clinic. We had a very active pharmacy, and a lot of folks who were getting that, maybe not necessarily getting their health care from the military side, but were getting it from the civilian side, would still come to the clinic because they could still get some of their prescriptions filled at the clinic, as long as the medications were on our formulary. We also had occupational health, so we saw a lot of workers both civilian and military, because of the fact that we were an occupational health facility. We also, of course, got to see patients from NOAA, which is also on the campus now, and because they are also a uniformed service of the federal government, and so they would also come in and were seen as patients. When I first came, which is sort of an interesting story, they had a BOQ, but I didn't stay at the BOQ. The BOQ had a fire some years ago, and the fire destroyed part of it, so we couldn't stay there. But one of my friends from Hawaii was actually the chief of staff, and so he invited me. He told me his house was the BOQ. So I stayed at his house, which was the Admiral's quarters, over by Pier 91, which is a very historic building. As I said, I came in December, and right after I arrived was the period of time when the Admiral entertained everyone in the area. So, we're talking about civic leaders and other military services. And so they had something like 3 parties in 3 days. And so when I first arrived, I came in and I walked into the house, and he told me to go and change my clothes because I had work to do. And we proceeded to decorate the house for Christmas, and there was a group of ladies who were responsible for decorating the house. And normally when the Patty, the wife of the chief of staff, did most of the cooking and things like that. But for this type of event, they did bring in extra help to do that. And so she didn't have to prepare all of these meals for all of these people. But it was a great way to get introduced to the environment of Seattle again by being at these parties. And it was great fun. And it was beautiful. And I stayed there for about 2 weeks, and then I got an apartment until I found my home. But it was a great introduction to the Seattle military community and the civic community as well. It was sad. It was a sad evolution. But then it was, and at the same time, they were also looking forward to the base at Everett. And that was one of the last things that I really got involved with, is because as they were talking about the Everett base, we needed a clinic there also. We needed some type of a medical facility there. And they had not, the Bureau of Medicine Surgery had not put a facility there, did not have any plans for a facility there. And I kept saying, we need to have a clinic there, we need to have a clinic. They were really convinced that Everett would never open. They were absolutely convinced, and it was getting to like 9 months and we still hadn't had a clinic. And finally they, with some more power than me, a few more stripes and bigger stripes than me, finally got them to say that they were going to put a clinic there. And the first clinic was portable buildings. And so I was involved with the design and the number of buildings. And first they wanted to be very, very small. Said, no, that wouldn't be adequate. And then we enlarged it. And so it took a while. So even though the base closed, the clinic remained functional. And so the sailors had to come all the way from Everett to be seen here at the Sandpoint until the new clinic opened there at the Naval Station in Everett. It didn't take very long, like less than probably 6 months, when it was expanded again. Mm-hmm. And of course now they've built a permanent facility there at Everett. And that was probably one of my last big fights to get something done. So I was glad to see it get done, and that it really was an adequate. So now it's a beautiful clinic, and it's really lovely. when I first came in, of course, we had our military uniforms, but we also had our nurses' uniforms. And we had nurses' caps, and the caps reflected your rank as well as the devices on your collar. And they were, I did have to, I guess my first uniforms were starched cotton uniforms. Eventually we went over to much more economical ones that were not starched cotton. And then eventually we had pantsuits. Navy nurses now don't wear a nurse's uniform, they wear the military uniforms. And so you can see nurses in whites during the summertime sometimes, or you can see them in khakis or in camouflage uniforms, and you can see them all colors. And we're serving in far more not only in, how am I going to just say, other facilities like ships, with nurses are far more nurses on, not just hospital ships. We've served on hospital ships and troop transports for many years. Now we serve on combatants as well. So you'll find Navy nurses, for example, on carriers and things of that nature. And one of the things I was really excited about, besides, I just read that the commanding officer at the hospital at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, is a Navy nurse. And it's a TRICARE hospital, again. And so the Navy nurse is now serving there. So I'm so very proud of her.
That's very good. Way to go.
Yeah. They finally recognize that just because you're a nurse, you have lots of leadership capabilities. Yes. And they're well educated, lots of experience, and we do lots of things with different disciplines, and so it really does work well.